Tonight we begin with a story whispered through time, the girl who slept for 9 years. It started with a quiet morning, a child resting peacefully, and a world that would keep turning without her. She fell asleep one morning just before the rooster crowed, her hands curled beneath her cheek, the warmth of breakfast still on the kitchen table. Her name was Ella, and she was 9 years old when her mother called her for school and found only silence. At first they thought she was pretending. Children do that. They feign sleep to skip chores or to draw affection. But when they shook her, when they opened the windows and splashed water on her face and called her name louder, she didn't move. Not once. Her breathing was slow and deep, like a whisper beneath a heavy quilt. She looked peaceful, unbothered, like she had simply decided to leave the world and go where no one could follow. The doctors came quickly. It was a small town in Pennsylvania, and news like this spreads fast. One came by horseback with a black bag full of tools and smelling salts. Another drove in from the city, curious and skeptical. They poked her, checked her pulse, examined her eyes. Nothing. No sign of trauma. No fever. No bruises. Her heartbeat was strong. Her body warm. Her skin soft and pale as milk. But her eyes would not open. By the third day, her parents stopped crying. By the fifth, the townspeople began visiting the little house, whispering prayers and offering remedies passed down from grandmothers and old books. One man said she had sleeping sickness, though no one quite knew what that meant. Another said she was touched by God. A few said it was the devil. A local preacher fasted for 2 days and then claimed she had been chosen to dream something important, something meant for all of them. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons changed. Her father built a special bed frame to help turn her body so she wouldn't get sores. Her mother fed her through a thin reed, drops of broth and milk, and when that failed, they learned to use small tubes with care and prayer. Her limbs remained thin but never wasted. Her skin never bruised. She never moaned or twitched. It was as if time slid off her like rain off wax. Her little brother turned 6, then 7, then 8. The girl in the bed remained still, as if untouched by the passing of years. Doctors stopped coming. The crowds faded. But the legend grew. People began calling her the sleeping saint. Her mother kept a journal beside the bed, writing letters to her every night. Letters Ella would never read. One summer, a man from Philadelphia arrived claiming to represent a medical society. He wanted to examine her body, maybe move her to a hospital. He offered money. Her father refused. The man returned with more doctors, more questions, more pressure. But the family never allowed her to be moved. They said she had chosen that room, that bed, that house. They would not let strangers carry her away. Some said she twitched one winter night during a storm, that her finger curled slightly when lightning struck the hills. Another claimed they heard her whisper in a dream, that she told them a name, but the man she named had been dead for years. Her story became a ghost's tale. Children dared each other to visit the edge of the woods where her house stood. Travelers knocked just to glimpse the miracle child. Some wept. Others laughed, thinking it a hoax, a parlor trick, some grand delusion kept alive by madness or grief. But no one ever saw her eyes open. The newspapers eventually wrote about her again, now as a curiosity, a relic of a town that wouldn't let go. They printed phrases like medical marvel, living sleep, and God's silent messenger. But no journalist could explain her. No physician could diagnose her. And her mother still waited. Then one spring morning, just as the apple trees were beginning to bloom, her eyes fluttered. First a tremble, then a full blink. Her mother dropped the bowl in her hands, shattering it on the floor. Ella's lips parted slightly. She whispered one word, though no one could understand it. Her voice was rough, like wind through dry leaves. She looked around the room, confused but not afraid. She was older. Not by days or months, by nearly a decade. Her hands were long, her arms thin and pale. She stared at her mother as if seeing a stranger, and then quietly began to cry. She did not remember the years that had passed. Not the turning of the seasons, the prayers spoken, or the people who had leaned over her with questions and hope. She remembered a single thing. A dream. A vast hallway of doors stretching into the dark. Behind each one, she said, was a version of herself. One was happy, another lonely, another angry, another gone. She had walked the hallway for a long, long time. She had knocked on each door. She had waited to be let back in. She said the hallway had no windows, only flickering lights that moved above her like stars trapped in glass. Sometimes she heard music behind the doors, sometimes weeping. One door she could never open no matter how hard she tried. She said the door was cold to the touch, and when she pressed her ear against it, she heard her own voice whispering something backwards. She believed deep inside that had she opened that one, she would never have come back. The townspeople were quiet when they heard she had woken. Some came to the house with flowers. Some came with their children, now grown, who remembered seeing her in bed as little ones. Others stayed away. They had built too many stories in her absence, called her angel, demon, hoax, miracle, and her waking destroyed all of them. Ella did not speak much at first. Her muscles were weak. Her voice was small, like someone learning language again. She sat in the sunlight as if it was new to her, blinking like a newborn fawn. She moved slowly. Her brother, now nearly a man, would sit beside her and read aloud from books she no longer remembered loving. Their mother hovered nearby, exhausted by joy, too tired to believe what she saw was real. Their father cried in silence when no one was looking. The doctors returned, of course. They came with their notebooks and machines. They called her a miracle of neurology, the only known case of what some labeled extreme idiopathic hypersomnia. Others said it was a coma, a suspended state, a protective sleep induced by trauma or fate. One doctor believed she had never slept at all, that she was awake but unreachable, dreaming while her eyes were closed for 9 years straight. Ella didn't care what they called it. She remembered the hallway. She remembered the sound of wind where there should have been silence. She remembered someone calling her name on the other side of that unopened door. A voice that sounded like hers but older, colder. She told her mother she didn't want to sleep with the lights off anymore. Soon after, newspapers ran fresh stories. Sleeping girl wakes after nearly a decade. Dream walker of Pennsylvania speaks. The girl who beat time. She didn't give interviews. She didn't go on stage. She refused the radio. When a man from New York offered her a book deal and a studio microphone, she quietly told him she hadn't returned to be studied. He came back because the hallway finally ended. At night, she sat by her window and stared out at the moon. Sometimes she would hum lullabies she didn't remember learning. Other times she would walk barefoot in the garden, trailing her fingers over petals like she had forgotten what it felt like to touch the living. She never returned to school. He didn't need to. She was 20 years old now, with the spirit of a girl who had died at 9 and been reborn in silence. One autumn evening, her brother found her in the attic with a pencil and a pile of paper. She was sketching the hallway she remembered. Door after door stretched across the page, all leading forward into a blackness she hadn't escaped from so much as outrun. On the back of each page she wrote a name. Not hers. Not anyone she knew. Just names. She continued this ritual for weeks, never explaining it. She said she had to remember them. Those behind the doors she couldn't open. The lives she might have lived. The versions of her that had waited in the dark and were left behind. She never fully rejoined the world. Not the way people hoped she would. She spoke gently, smiled softly, but always kept something hidden behind her eyes. When people asked her what it felt like to sleep for so long, she never gave the same answer twice. Sometimes she said it was peaceful. Sometimes she said it was cold. Once she said it was like drowning in honey, sweet and slow and endless. But she always said this. When the hallway ended, she didn't walk out. He was pushed. She never said who or what pushed her. Only that she had stood before that final door for what felt like years, watching the light under it pulse like a heartbeat. Behind her, all the other doors had shut, locked, gone. There was no going back, no other options, no choices left to make. And then, as if the world had decided without her, she felt a pressure at her back. Not hands, not wind, just inevitability. And when the door opened, it was not light that met her, but the smell of rain and the sound of someone crying softly. Her own voice calling for her mother. From then on, she always looked over her shoulder when walking through doorways. She covered mirrors at night and kept salt beneath her pillow. People in town whispered that she had come back different. Some said she was cursed. Others said she had seen the other side of life and returned holy. Children avoided her at first, then slowly became curious. She never raised her voice, never seemed angry, but there was something in the way she moved that made people step aside without thinking. As if she were gliding through a space they couldn't see. On the anniversary of her awakening, her mother held a gathering. A quiet meal, nothing grand. A few neighbors came. Her brother baked a small cake. She smiled, nodded politely, thanked everyone. But when the guests left, she sat in the dark by the fireplace and didn't move for hours. Her mother found her there, eyes open, unblinking, staring at nothing. She whispered her name, then louder, then shook her shoulder. Ella blinked twice, then smiled. "I'm still here," she said. "I just went back for a moment." She never said what that meant. The sketches grew stranger over time. No more hallways. Instead, tangled forests. Thin staircases winding through trees. Doorless houses. Pale animals with no eyes. And always the same figure, drawn small in every frame. A girl standing at the edge, looking in. She began to sleep less. Only for an hour here and there. She would lie down at dusk, rise at midnight, and walk barefoot outside until the sun hinted at the horizon. Her father tried to stop her once, worried she'd catch cold. She gently touched his hand and said, "I'm not walking to get away. I'm walking to stay." After that, he let her go. Sometimes she spoke of dreams that weren't hers. Faces she had never seen in life but recognized from the hallway. A boy with ink-stained fingers. A woman humming beneath the ocean. A man writing letters to someone who would never be born. She said they were real, not like dreams, but memories borrowed from other doors. Lives that tried to cling to her like shadows in morning fog. She would forget them by noon, but in those early hours they overwhelmed her. As the years passed, she aged slowly but with grace. Her hair grew long. Her voice settled into something steady, though soft. She painted now, canvases filled with strange perspectives. Ceilings from below, staircases that led into clouds, doorways floating in rivers. People came from far towns to see them. Some felt moved, others disturbed. One art collector offered her thousands for a series called Rooms Without Walls. She refused. She said they weren't paintings. They were warnings. Then one night something changed. She left the house quietly as she always did, but didn't return by dawn. By mid-morning, her father noticed her boots were still gone from the porch. The tea her mother always left warming beside the window was untouched. Her bed, as always, was perfectly made, as though she'd only ever laid atop the covers rather than inside them. But the back door had been left open, and a trail of shallow footprints led out into the grass, damp with dew, slowly fading into the tree line. They searched the woods first, the same paths she often walked beneath the stars, barefoot and quiet as breath. Her brother shouted her name over and over until his voice cracked. Neighbors joined. The town grew hushed, not from disbelief but dread. Felt too familiar, too sudden. As though time, after being cheated once, had returned to take back what it was owed. By nightfall there was still no sign of her. No tracks. No torn fabric. No note. Just the open door and the wind. Her mother sat in Ella's room that night, holding the last sketch she had drawn. It was different from the others. No forest. No staircase. No girl. Just a door floating in the center of a blank page, slightly ajar. Inside, the darkness was not black, but deep blue, almost shimmering like the surface of a lake at dusk. At the bottom, in soft pencil, Ella had written 5 words. Some doors don't stay closed. 2 days passed, then 3, then 7. The police stopped searching after a week. There was no crime, no evidence, no direction to chase. Just the missing girl. But her family never accepted the silence. Her brother walked the woods every night for a month. Her mother lit a candle by the door and placed a cup of milk beside it, the way she used to when Ella was small and afraid of storms. Her father, who rarely spoke since her return, began to write in her journal. Not letters but questions. Where did you go? Did something call you back? Are you walking another hallway now? The town moved on again. Slowly and easily. Some claimed to see her in dreams. A few said they heard humming outside their windows, songs they couldn't place. One boy woke screaming one night, saying a woman with long dark hair had stood at the foot of his bed and asked him which door he'd choose when the time came. Years passed. And then one winter morning, 9 years to the day since she first fell asleep, a girl walked into town barefoot, covered in frost, hair hanging in tangles, her lips blue but her eyes wide open. It wasn't Ella. But she held one of Ella's sketches in her hand. The girl couldn't speak at first. Her mouth moved, her eyes searched faces as if looking for something she had only ever seen in a dream. She was young, no more than 9 or 10, but her skin was marked by a thin white scar across her temple, and her palms were raw as if she had been crawling through ice and earth. The town doctor tried to calm her, offered her blankets and warm broth, but she only clung tighter to the sketch in her hand. It was worn and damp, edges curled, the pencil faded. But there was no mistaking it, it was Ella's. The same lines, the same floating door in a sea of blue. On the back, someone had written a single word in neat, slow strokes. Open. They asked the girl where she had come from. She shook her head. They asked her name. She didn't know. But when they showed her Ella's portrait, she stared at it for a long time and whispered, "She told me not to wait." No one knew what that meant. The police questioned nearby towns, posted her image across counties, searched for missing children. Nothing. No matches. No one came forward. She was a child from nowhere, carrying a message from someone who had vanished twice. Ella's family took her in, of course. There was nowhere else for her to go. The girl stayed in Ella's room, slept in Ella's bed. She would sit for hours beside the window, tracing invisible lines in the glass, always humming softly, melodies that Ella used to hum before sleep took her the first time. The mother never asked her to stop. She only listened. At night, the girl would sometimes speak in her sleep. Not words. Numbers. Strings of them. 4 at a time. Repeating. Each night a different sequence. Her brother, older now, began writing them down. It became a ritual. He filled a notebook. None of the numbers made sense. Not coordinates. Not dates. But he couldn't stop. One night the girl woke screaming. She said she had seen under the hallway. When they asked what that meant, she stared at them with eyes too calm for a child and said, "It's not made of wood. It breathes." She stopped speaking for 2 days after that. The family began to notice other things. Clocks would stop at 3:33 a.m. The bedroom door sometimes opened on its own, only a crack. They'd hear footsteps on the stairs when no one was there. A mirror in the hallway began fogging over without reason, always in the same shape. A small, perfect oval in the center, like a breath that never faded. One night, the girl drew her first picture since arriving. It wasn't of a door or a hallway. It was of a field. Empty except for one figure. Ella, standing at the far edge, facing away, her hand outstretched toward something invisible just beyond the page. When asked what Ella was reaching for, the girl simply said, "You don't see it yet." Word of the girl spread again. People came quietly, curious. Some asked to speak to her. She rarely answered, but she always offered them the same thing, a folded piece of paper. Each time different, each time a sketch. Some were serene, some unsettling. One man unfolded his and began to cry immediately, though he never told anyone why. Another tore his to pieces on the spot and ran out of town that same night. The mother watched it all and said little. She still left the candle burning by the door each night. Still waited by the window, her eyes searching the woods like they held a secret she already knew. And sometimes, when no one was looking, she would whisper into the darkness, "Not again. Please, not again." Then one night, during the first snowfall of the season, the girl placed her last drawing on the table. It was a map. The map was drawn with a precision no child should possess. Sharp lines, shaded valleys, dotted ridges that suggested not only geography but memory. It wasn't a map of the town nor any county nearby. It was older. It felt older. The trees marked were twisted, wrong in scale. The river curved like a ribbon through something that resembled their woods, yet didn't. There were no names, no roads, only symbols. A sun drawn in black ink, a house with no windows, a circle within a larger circle, and at the very center of it all, a single word scrawled in Ella's unmistakable handwriting. Her brother stared at it for hours that night. He held it up to the lamplight. He traced it onto clean parchment. He even laid it beside the sketches Ella had made years earlier, the hallway drawings, the doors, the spirals, and began to see a pattern. They weren't dreams, he began to believe. They were instructions. The girl watched him silently, eyes wide and unblinking. That night something happened to the sky. The stars disappeared, not behind clouds, not under storm, but simply went out. One by one, like someone blowing candles from the edge of the world. The town fell into an unnatural blackness. The power flickered, then died. Silence fell. Not the silence of night, but the silence of something waiting to speak. She stood at the edge of the woods before they noticed she was gone. The snow was thin, moonlight returning just enough to outline her form in the dark. She held the map in one hand and the sketch of the open door in the other. Her brother caught up to her just before the trees thickened. He didn't scold her. He didn't ask where she was going. He just said, "Is she there?" The girl nodded. She said, "The door isn't closed anymore. But it doesn't open the same way." They walked together in silence. No flashlight. No trail. Just the map. And as they moved deeper into the forest, something strange began to unfold around them. The trees no longer matched reality. Some leaned in unnatural curves. Some stood too still. The air grew heavy with a scent like wet stone and ash. And beneath their feet the snow no longer crunched. It hummed. After what felt like hours, the girl stopped. Before them was a clearing, round and perfect. The trees around it bent outward as if afraid to enter. In the center stood a structure, half ruined, half waiting. It wasn't made of stone or wood. It looked like it had been grown. A doorway, tall and narrow, carved into a shape like a spine turned upright. And beside it, standing still as a statue, was Ella. She had not aged a day. Her hair hung in the same soft wave. Her eyes glowed faintly with something that wasn't light. Her feet were bare, sunk into the frozen earth, and her hands were outstretched, not toward them but toward the doorway, which pulsed faintly as if breathing. She looked at her brother, and for the first time in nearly a decade she smiled fully. "You found her," she said. "I didn't know if I could bring her out alone." He stepped forward, heart thudding, unsure if he was dreaming or dead or somewhere in between. "What is this?" he whispered. "Where did you go?" "I went in. I stayed too long. But not everything that stays is lost," she said softly. "I thought I was alone, but then she came to me. She walked the hallways like I did. Only she never closed the doors." The girl walked forward now, slowly, and took Ella's hand. The doorway behind them flickered. "She came from a place I didn't know existed," Ella continued. "A place beneath the hallway. She remembered me. She brought me back." Her brother's voice cracked. "Are you staying?" Ella looked at him for a long time, her eyes full of sorrow and something deeper, acceptance. "No," she said. "But you can." The doorway opened wider. The humming in the earth grew louder. He didn't move at first. He couldn't. His legs were heavy, rooted by 1,000 moments, childhood laughter, quiet dinners, years of waiting beside an empty bed. He looked at Ella, truly looked, and saw in her something impossible to name. She was his sister, yes, but no longer only that. She had become something woven between time and dream, grief and return. The girl beside her held the same weight, like someone who had walked out of myth and never looked back. "I don't understand," he whispered. "You're not meant to," Ella said gently. "It's not about understanding. It's about remembering what you already forgot." The doorway shimmered again. It was no longer shaped like bone. Now it looked like his childhood bedroom door. Then the front door of their old house. Then the cracked doorway in their grandparents' cellar. It changed each second, always familiar, always waiting. "I don't want to lose you again," he said. "You never did. I was only elsewhere." She stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest. "But this place, it's breaking. The spaces in between are collapsing. The hallway is fraying." "What does that mean?" The girl answered, her voice low and certain. "Doors will start opening on their own." Ella nodded. "Some already have. That's why she came out. That's why I could follow. But others, they weren't meant to open. Some things are coming through that do not belong." He looked into her eyes. "So what do we do?" "You close them," she said. "Not all of them. Just the ones that hum wrong. The ones that breathe too loud." "And how do I know which ones those are?" "You'll feel it," the girl whispered. "In your spine. In your teeth. You'll know." Behind them the doorway dimmed, then pulsed once more, this time wider, deeper. He couldn't see what lay beyond, only movement. Shapes that weren't quite shadows. A vast breath pulling inward, waiting to exhale. Ella turned toward it. "Wait," he called. But she paused and looked over her shoulder, her hair floating slightly as if underwater. "You'll see me again," she said. "Not here. Not like this. But in the places between sleep and memory. I'll leave the door cracked." Then slowly she and the girl stepped into the frame together. There was no flash, no noise. Only a faint ripple in the cold air, like the sigh of a forest when no one is listening. And the doorway vanished. He stood in the clearing alone, map in hand, silence pressing all around him. Behind him, the path he had taken was gone. But before him, scattered through the trees, he began to see them. Dozens of faint doorways, invisible unless you knew where to look. Some were tall, some crooked, some barely big enough to crawl through. All of them humming. He reached for the first one, placed his hand on its edge and waited. He felt his jaw tighten, his fingers tremble. And from deep inside, a whisper, not a voice, but a knowing. Not this one. He stepped back and moved to the next. This would be his life now. Closing what should never have been opened. And searching always for the one door left slightly ajar. The forest no longer felt like a forest. It had changed, subtle at first, then unmistakably. The trees were spaced like pillars in a cathedral, too precise to be random. The light filtering through the branches had no source, glowing softly from nowhere and everywhere. The air buzzed, not with insects but with memory. He could feel it brushing against his skin, tickling old thoughts, making him remember things he'd long forgotten. The exact smell of his grandfather's coat, the way Ella once laughed with a chipped tooth before it was fixed, a song his mother sang only once when she thought no one was listening. Each door pulsed with that same ghost light. Some were beautiful, arched and wrapped in vines, carved with ancient script he couldn't read. Others looked like wounds in the world, jagged, blackened, humming wrong. Those he didn't touch. He simply stared until they faded, like blinking away a nightmare. He began marking the trees beside the doors he closed. Lines scratched in bark, symbols he invented as he went. After a while he started to hear things behind some of the doors. He didn't move at first. He couldn't. His legs were heavy, rooted by 1,000 moments. Childhood laughter, quiet dinners, years of waiting beside an empty bed. He looked at Ella, truly looked, and saw in her something impossible to name. She was his sister, yes, but no longer only that. She had become something woven between time and dream, grief and return. The girl beside her held the same weight, like someone who had walked out of myth and never looked back. "I don't understand," he whispered. "You're not meant to," Ella said gently. "It's not about understanding. It's about remembering what you already forgot." The doorway shimmered again. It was no longer shaped like bone. Now it looked like his childhood bedroom door. Then the front door of their old house. Then the cracked doorway in their grandparents' cellar. It changed each second, always familiar, always waiting. "I don't want to lose you again," he said. "You never did. I was only elsewhere." She stepped closer and placed her hand on his chest. "But this place, it's breaking. The spaces in between are collapsing. The hallway is fraying." "What does that mean?" The girl answered, her voice low and certain. "Doors will start opening on their own." Ella nodded. "Some already have. That's why she came out. That's why I could follow. But others, they weren't meant to open. Some things are coming through that do not belong." He looked into her eyes. "So what do we do?" "You close them," she said. "Not all of them. Just the ones that hum wrong. The ones that breathe too loud." "And how do I know which ones those are?" "You'll feel it," the girl whispered. "In your spine. In your teeth. You'll know." Behind them the doorway dimmed, then pulsed once more, this time wider, deeper. He couldn't see what lay beyond, only movement. Shapes that weren't quite shadows. A vast breath pulling inward, waiting to exhale. Ella turned toward it. "Wait," he called. But she paused and looked over her shoulder, her hair floating slightly as if underwater. "You'll see me again," she said. "Not here. Not like this. But in the places between sleep and memory. I'll leave the door cracked." Then slowly she and the girl stepped into the frame together. There was no flash, no noise. Only a faint ripple in the cold air, like the sigh of a forest when no one is listening. And the doorway vanished. He stood in the clearing alone, map in hand, silence pressing all around him. Behind him, the path he had taken was gone. But before him, scattered through the trees, he began to see them. Dozens of faint doorways, invisible unless you knew where to look. Some were tall, some crooked, some barely big enough to crawl through. All of them humming. He reached for the first one, placed his hand on its edge and waited. He felt his jaw tighten, his fingers tremble. And from deep inside, a whisper, not a voice, but a knowing. Not this one. He stepped back and moved to the next. This would be his life now. Closing what should never have been opened. And searching always for the one door left slightly ajar. Not voices exactly. More like impressions. Sobbing behind one, soft pleading behind another, and once, music that made his knees nearly buckle. But he remembered what Ella had said. "You'll feel it in your spine." One night, after closing a narrow doorway that led nowhere but a flickering black hallway, he found something new. A small object in the snow. A folded page, damp and slightly torn, tucked between two roots. It was one of Ella's old sketches, the first kind from the early days. The hallway, the endless doors, drawn in her light pencil touch. But this one had something new. A mirror on the ceiling. He turned the paper over. In her handwriting, "I found your room." He sat down right there in the snow and cried. He cried not like a child, not like a man, but like someone remembering they once had a name they had forgotten and suddenly hearing it again for the first time. The sobs came in waves, quiet and deep, like the ocean pressing against a cliff. When he could breathe again, he looked up, and there it was. Another doorway. This one wasn't humming. It wasn't whispering. It simply was silent. Built from something that looked like light slowed into solid form. The shape of it pulled something in his chest tighter, like an ache he had carried his whole life without ever knowing it had weight. He stepped forward. The frame shimmered but didn't open. He touched the side, no hum, no fear, just warmth. And then a voice, low and calm, not from inside the door but from behind him. "She's waiting." He turned. The girl was there again, barefoot in the snow, hair now longer, her face older than before. She didn't look like a child anymore. She said, "This door is yours," she said. He swallowed hard. "Where does it go?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the doorway, placed both hands against it, and whispered something he couldn't hear. The frame opened, not violently, not with light, but like water breaking softly around the hull of a boat. Inside, not darkness, not a hallway, just a field, green, tall with grass, swaying as though stirred by a wind he couldn't yet feel. And at the far edge of it, near a lone tree with bark like silver, stood Ella. He was smiling, not the heavy, haunted smile of before, but the first one, the one she had before the sleep. The girl looked at him and nodded. "She found your door. You don't have to walk anymore." He stepped forward, past the hum, past the memory, into the doorway, and this time no one vanished. The doorway remained open behind him, for the first time, and the hallway was finally still. The grass kissed his legs as he moved through it, warm and impossibly soft, each blade bending like it knew him. The sky above was the color of early morning, not blue, not gray, just that in-between hush that only comes before the first bird sings. The light here didn't come from the sun. There was no sun, just a glow like joy made visible, stretching across the horizon in every direction. Ella stood beneath the silver-barked tree, waiting. No urgency, no sorrow, just a presence like she had always been there and always would be. As he approached, she didn't speak right away. She just reached out and took his hand, folding his fingers gently into hers like a promise or maybe a release. "You walked further than anyone else," she said. "I was only looking for you." "I know," she smiled. "But the doors weren't only mine. They were yours too. We just forgot that part." He looked around. The field stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted occasionally by trees like the one she stood beneath. Between them he saw movement, figures in the distance, walking slow, some laughing, some sitting quietly in circles, others painting the grass with their hands. No buildings, no roads, but none of them looked lost. "They came back?" he asked. "Some," she said. "Some find their doors early. Some walk all their lives. Others," she looked at the horizon, her eyes going soft, "they close a door and sleep behind it, waiting." "And the girl? She walks still," Ella said. "She never stays in one place for long. She leaves messages, maps. She helps those who don't know they're dreaming yet." He wanted to ask more, but the moment didn't want questions. It wanted stillness. So he stood beside his sister beneath the silver-barked tree, and they listened. To the quiet wind, to the memory of their old house, now no longer haunted but whole again in both of them. To the distant echo of a hum that was finally fading, not with menace but with peace, like a lullaby finishing its last note. And behind them, somewhere far away in a world of clocks and stone and sorrow, a mother awoke from a dream and found her daughter's journal on the floor, open to a page she had never seen before. A single line had been written across the center. "He found me." Then the candle by the door, the one she had lit every night for 9 years, flickered once, and went out. The mother didn't panic. She didn't cry. She simply sat very still, hands folded in her lap, staring at the words as though they had been spoken aloud. "He found me." The ink was dry yet new. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ella's, unchanged, curling like vines across the paper, gentle and sure. Outside the wind shifted, brushing against the house like an old friend returning for one last visit. She rose slowly and moved to the door. The candle had gone cold, the wick a tiny curl of ash, yet the room was still lit, faintly from nowhere in particular. She didn't light another. He didn't need to. The silence in the house had changed, not empty now but full, as though laughter had just ended, as though the walls remembered who once leaned against them. In the corner sat a box of Ella's sketches, long since tucked away in grief. She pulled it open, piece by piece, running her fingers along the edges. Hallways, doorways, trees, circles, eyes. At the bottom, folded carefully and tucked into a yellowing envelope, she found a drawing she didn't remember ever seeing. It was the tree, the one with the silver bark, and beneath it 2 small figures standing hand in hand. No faces, just silhouettes, but she knew them both. She pressed the paper to her chest, closed her eyes, and breathed out slowly. The kind of breath you let go of after carrying it for years. In the field, beneath the silver tree, the air shimmered faintly as if time had sighed. Ella and her brother sat in the grass now, leaning against the trunk, watching the soft shapes of others pass through the tall grass beyond. Some walked toward unseen doors. Some disappeared into the light. No one hurried. No one looked back. "You think she'll find her way home too?" he asked. Ella nodded, her eyes on the horizon. "She always does. Just not always to the same place. And us. We're already home," she said. He leaned back, the warmth of the tree against his shoulders, the weight of the world forgotten somewhere behind the last door he'd closed. And far, far away, back where snow still fell and clocks still ticked, a young girl with bare feet and star-bright eyes placed one final drawing beneath a stranger's pillow before slipping back into the space between walls, between years, between dreams. The hallway, once endless, now stood still. No doors left ajar. No humming in the dark. Just peace. Just silence. Just sleep. Somewhere deep beneath the world people thought they knew, beneath floors and ceilings, beneath hospitals and homes, beneath history itself, the hallway remained. Not gone. Just resting. Its walls, once pulsing with restless energy, were quiet now. The doors, those strange thresholds that once led to fragments of memory, to lost timelines and almost lives, no longer glowed. They stood in stillness, each one sealed, their locks grown over like bark reclaiming an old wound. And yet, in the center of that vast and forgotten corridor, where the air used to hum like distant thunder, a new sound began. It was soft. It was steady. It was footsteps. Small ones. Bare feet padding gently over the polished stone, walking not in fear, not in haste, but with purpose. The girl had returned, older now though no time had passed. Her hair fell down her back in quiet waves, her dress woven from threads of memory and moonlight. In her hand she carried no map this time, no sketch, no page from a journal, just a key. She walked past every door, glancing once at each, not to open, not to linger, just to remember. Here a door with vines, there a door carved in symbols, one with teeth, one with stars, one that still wept when no one watched. And finally, at the very end where no door had ever stood before, there it was, wooden, unmarked, silent, waiting. She stood before it for a long while, her fingers tracing its grain, her breath steady. There was no hum, no pull, no warning, just the quiet certainty that this was the next one. Not meant for closing, not meant for fear, just meant for beginning. She slipped the key into the lock. It turned without resistance, and as the door swung open, the hallway behind her sighed, as if in relief, as if it had done its duty. The light that spilled out wasn't bright or blinding. It was warm, golden, full of scent and sound. Rain on leaves, paper turning, laughter caught in the corners of an old room. Beyond the door, children were waiting. Not lost, not trapped, not dreaming. Just waiting to be told the truth about the places between sleep and waking. The places where doors hum, where names echo before they're given, where memory walks barefoot in the snow to find those it refuses to forget. She stepped through. The door closed behind her softly, and the hallway at last slept. The world she entered was not one of shadows or silence. It was alive, blooming with a kind of light that didn't burn but healed. It was dusk always, or maybe dawn, the kind of in-between hour when everything breathes softer and nothing feels rushed. Trees grew in slow spirals, their branches forming canopies like cathedral ceilings, and rivers ran uphill without splashing, as if time flowed differently here, calmer, kinder. The children looked up when she entered. Not with surprise. They had been expecting her. Some stood. Others remained seated in the grass or upon great smooth stones that hummed faintly when touched. They were of all ages, though none older than the years when dreams still feel like truth. A few held drawings, others held pieces of paper folded into doors. One boy clutched a compass with no needle. A girl wore a crown made of feathers and torn notes. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. He sat with them. They gathered around her, a quiet gravity pulling them close, not to her but to the key now resting in her lap. It shimmered faintly, as if remembering every lock it had touched, every whisper it had heard, every door it had once opened or closed. And then she began to tell them stories. Not with words at first, but with memory painted across the sky like light moving through water. They saw Ella walking the hallway, tracing her fingers across forgotten doors. They saw the boy who followed her, who closed what others feared. They saw the silver-barked tree and the wide open field, the sketches left like breadcrumbs across 1,000 realities. They saw the house with the flickering candle, the mother waiting, the brother weeping. They saw the hallway grow still. And they saw themselves, each of them, standing once at the edge of some unknowable place, too afraid to step forward, too forgotten to be found. The girl showed them they hadn't been forgotten at all. She told them the doors weren't meant to trap. They were invitations. Some led forward, some led back, some led home, and some, rare, glowing softly like the last star before morning, led here, to this place, this gathering, this beginning. The children listened, and slowly, one by one, they began to remember. Not who they had been or where they had come from, but why they had been called. Why their dreams always ended at doorways. Why they heard humming when others heard only wind. Because the world had left something undone. Because someone must walk where others sleep. Because behind every forgotten story, there is a door waiting to be opened by someone brave enough to knock. She passed the key around. Each child held it. Some cried. Some laughed. One simply nodded, eyes closed, as if remembering something from before they were born. When the key returned to her hands, it was no longer metal. It had become a seed. She held it to her heart. And somewhere, far away, in a world of schedules and streetlights, a new child stirred in sleep. Eyes flickering, hand twitching, lips forming the outline of a name not yet learned. A door waited. The hallway slept. But the seed was planted now. And someday soon, another would wake. In the stillness that followed, the seed began to glow. Not brightly, not loudly, just a warm pulse, like a heartbeat shared. The children leaned in, and without speaking, they each understood. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility. Something old and deep had been entrusted to them, not to carry as a burden, but to pass forward gently like a song whispered ear to ear. The girl held the seed high, and the sky above shifted. Stars reappeared, not scattered randomly, but arranged in gentle spirals, as if a hand beyond time was guiding them into shape. Each star pulsed once, twice, then faded softly, leaving behind invisible trails like doorways drawn in ink only dreamers could see. Then she spoke. This time her voice filled the clearing. It echoed not across the air, but through memory itself, like the words had been spoken long ago and were only now catching up. "You are not here to dream forever," she said. "You are here to remember what the world forgets." The trees rustled. The ground breathed. A faint wind swept through the children's hair, and in it was the scent of old paper, candle smoke, and distant snow. "You will return," she continued. "Each of you. One day, one night. You will hear a hum beneath your pillow or see a crack in the wall where none existed. You'll feel the key though you may not see it. And when you do, you'll know what to do." A child with freckles and moss on their sleeves raised a hand. "But what if we're scared?" She smiled. Not sadly but knowingly. You will be. That's how you'll know it's real. A boy with a missing tooth asked, "Will we remember you?" "Not always," she said. "But sometimes. In dreams. In stories. In the moment before you open the door when your heart feels too loud." A hush fell over them. Then quietly, one by one, the children began to stand. Not in farewell. In readiness. They walked calmly into the trees. Not in a line, not in a march. Each one choosing their path. No doors were visible, but they didn't need to be. Each child walked toward the place only they could return to, toward a story still waiting to be finished. She watched them go, the seed still in her palm, now cool, its light fading into stillness. Then she was alone again. Or almost. A second figure stepped into the clearing, tall, quiet, eyes full of old storms. It was him, the brother, no longer searching, no longer closing doors. He stood beside her now, weathered but certain, and reached for her hand. "Are you ready?" he asked. She looked at the sky. The last spiral had gone dim. Only one star remained, low on the horizon, pulsing faintly. She nodded. Together they knelt and placed the seed into the soil beneath the silver-barked tree. And as they stood again, a single flower began to bloom. Small, white, shaped like a key. Somewhere a child's eyes opened in the dark, and whispered not in fear but in wonder, "It's time." And so it began. The flower shimmered faintly in the darkening clearing, its petals like folded paper, fragile and perfect. As the last tendril of starlight faded behind the horizon, it gave off its own soft light, a quiet beacon not for the eyes but for the heart, pulsed with knowing, with invitation, with remembrance. The girl and her brother stood in silence, hands entwined like roots that had always belonged to the same tree. Around them the forest breathed. Somewhere above, the old hallway, if it still existed at all, had gone still. It no longer called. It no longer wept. The doors, those sacred thresholds of forgetting and return, had learned to sleep. And now new paths would open, not built from stone and wood and dream, but from memory, kindness, and choice. The girl turned to him. "You feel it too, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "It's not humming anymore. It's listening." They both looked down at the flower. It swayed gently without wind. Its glow deepened, then faded, then deepened again, like it was breathing. "It'll find the next one soon," she whispered. Her brother stepped forward and crouched beside the blossom. "What do you think they'll be like?" She tilted her head, thinking. "Brave," she said, "and stubborn, curious, a little broken, but with just enough light left in them to crack open the dark." He smiled. "Sounds like us." She laughed, a sound like bells heard through trees in winter. "We weren't chosen because we were perfect. We were chosen because we didn't stop walking." The flower trembled. A pulse passed beneath their feet, gentle like a drumbeat felt through a quiet floor. And far, far away, a boy in a hospital bed sat upright without warning. A girl paused halfway through a dream and turned back to face a door she'd always ignored. An old man, long blind, opened his eyes for the first time in years and saw the hallway waiting in the reflection of a rain-soaked window. A newborn exhaled its first breath and blinked, seeing something that made the room go silent. Each of them felt it. The pull. The call. Not to escape life, but to walk deeper into it. To find the truths hiding beneath sorrow, beneath silence, beneath the skin of the world. To listen for the hum and to learn when to follow it, and when to close the door behind them. The girl placed her hand on the flower one last time. "It's awake now." And with that, she and her brother turned from the tree, from the clearing, from the soft ache of memory made real. They walked into the woods, not to vanish, not to sleep, but to live. Quietly, fully, freely, because the cycle didn't belong to them anymore. It had passed on. And somewhere a child was dreaming of a hallway they'd never seen, and would know exactly which door to open when the time came. And in that dream, a soft one tucked between fever and lullaby, The child stood barefoot in the hallway. They were small, younger than time could measure, but their eyes held something ancient. The doors around them were familiar, though they'd never walked here before. Some doors were tall and made of glass, others crooked like old teeth. One looked like the closet in their grandmother's attic. Another breathed slowly as if it were asleep and waiting to wake. But the child wasn't afraid. They reached out toward the one door that pulsed. It was ordinary, plain, made of wood that smelled like rain. No symbols. No glowing lines. Just a simple brass knob. Behind them, a wind moved gently through the hallway. A wind without source, like memory catching up. They turned the knob. The door creaked open, not ominous but curious, like it had questions of its own. Beyond it, the world was unfamiliar but not unkind. A field of flowers that whispered. A library where books turned their own pages. A sky that changed color with every heartbeat. And at the center of it all, in the far-off distance, stood a silver tree. Beneath it, blooming again, was a single white flower. The child stepped forward. With each footfall, the hallway behind them dimmed and curled inward, vanishing like a story that had finally reached its final line. Not erased, remembered. The child walked until the door behind them closed. And somewhere, far away, in a little house where the curtains fluttered even though the windows were shut, a journal fell open on its own. No hand touched it. But across the page, in ink so faint it could have been a whisper, a new line had written itself. One has arrived. And with that, the flower bloomed again. Its light steady. Its purpose reborn. The story continued. Not in the hands of the girl. Not in the steps of the brother. But in the quiet courage of someone new. A child who had listened. A child who had followed the hum. A child who, in time, would learn which doors to open. And which ones to close. And the world once more waited. In the garden of that in-between world, where time trickled like a lazy stream and every breeze carried the scent of stories untold, the child wandered deeper. Not lost, guided. The trees leaned slightly as they passed, like old friends bending low to hear a secret. Birds sang melodies that didn't come from any earthbound forest. The path underfoot curved of its own will, like it wanted to be walked. The silver tree waited in the distance, patient and still, as though it had known the child long before they had even taken shape in the world of waking. With each step, the child felt something unfolding inside. Memories not their own fluttered across their mind. Faces blurred by time, voices laced with longing and hope, laughter echoing from rooms they'd never entered. They saw glimpses. A girl sketching doors by candlelight, a boy closing one gently and weeping, a mother whispering prayers into still rooms, a hallway that once hummed like a sleeping beast. The child did not understand all of it, but they didn't need to. They just felt it. The inheritance. Not of blood or name, but of purpose. At last, the child reached the silver-barked tree. Its roots twisted through the ground like the veins of the world itself, and its branches stretched into skies that shimmered like silk dipped in moonlight. Beneath it bloomed the white flower, the one shaped like a key, its petals slightly curled as though inviting the child to touch. They knelt, and the moment their fingers brushed the bloom, something ancient and gentle stirred. The world didn't change, it remembered. Above, stars flickered back into being, not in chaos but in constellations shaped like stairways, eyes, doors, and spirals. The wind carried whispers again, no longer mournful but full of welcome. And across every space, distant cities, quiet barns, lonely apartments, crowded classrooms, and silent dreams, those attuned to the in-between felt the shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. But it was everywhere. The hallway had returned, not as a corridor of fear, but as a path of becoming. The doors would open again, yes, but this time not on their own. They would be opened by those who knew how to listen. The child stood now, taller somehow, not in body but in being. They looked at the silver tree, and for the first time it nodded back. And the flower, the soft glowing rose from its stem, and began to float. Not up, not away, but into the child. into their chest, where it settled like warmth that would never dim. Far away, an old storyteller paused mid-sentence, eyes wide. A crow in a tower dropped a piece of parchment and cawed once before flying into the night. A lantern flickered in a long-abandoned hallway, and a whisper crossed into the sleeping world. The watcher has awakened. The girl who once walked the in-between felt it too, wherever she was now. She smiled, not because the journey was over, but because it had truly, finally begun. And in the hush that followed, as the last echoes of that whisper rippled outward across the unseen seams of the world, the child took their first breath as the watcher. It wasn't a title they spoke aloud. It wasn't something worn or claimed. It was simply true. The way light belongs to the sun. The way silence belongs to the night. The way doors belong to those who understand both opening and closing. The clearing around the silver tree began to shift. Not dissolve, reveal. What had looked like a quiet grove in an impossible place unfolded outward into something vast. Pathways emerged, etched into the grass by invisible feet long vanished. Monoliths rose in the distance, covered in ancient sigils pulsing gently, like hearts remembering how to beat. Pools of water mirrored not the sky above, but other places. Schoolyards, alleyways, hospital corridors, mountains, stairwells, closets. Thresholds. The child, no longer entirely a child, looked around and saw them. Dozens. Hundreds. Doorways held still in dream light, waiting not for seekers but for guides. Because that was what the watcher truly was. Not a keeper of secrets. Not a warrior against darkness, but a lantern held high for others who had forgotten they ever carried one. The flower now nestled within their chest began to thrum gently. Not a noise, a feeling. It was time to choose. The watcher would not stay here. Not yet. Their task, like the girl before them, was to walk between the seams of the waking and the sleeping, between what was remembered and what was lost. One doorway shimmered softly to the left. A small boy was crying on the other side, trapped in a dream of thunder and locked doors. Another pulsed to the right. A woman sat beside a bed, clutching the hand of a comatose lover, whispering stories to a face that hadn't stirred in months. Behind them, a third flickered fast, someone trying not to wake up, terrified of the morning. So many calls. So many aching moments caught in silence. The watcher did not hesitate. They stepped toward the nearest door and reached out their hand. It opened before they touched it, responding to the presence of someone who had not come to take or to flee, but simply to listen, to hold, to guide. And as they passed through, the silver-barked tree remained still in its field of stars, blooming quietly. Around it, other flowers began to grow, slowly, cautiously, one by one, each a whisper, each a promise, each a beginning waiting for a heart brave enough to follow the hum, because the hallway would never truly sleep again. Not while a watcher still walked, and not while there were stories left to remember. The watcher stepped into the dream. It was dim, flickering between shadows and color, the way a memory does when it's trying to decide whether to stay or fade. Walls curled like paper. The sky dripped sideways. And there, at the center, a boy huddled in the corner of a room that was also a forest, that was also a closet, that was also his fear. He was younger than the watcher. Maybe 6, maybe 7. But his face held an old panic, the kind that doesn't start in one moment but builds from 1,000 silent ones. He had buried his head in his knees, rocking slowly, whispering a name over and over that the dream tried to swallow. The watcher didn't speak. They simply sat down across from him and waited for the boy to notice, for the silence to stretch just far enough to feel safe. When he finally looked up, the boy didn't flinch. He didn't ask where the watcher had come from or how they had entered the place he thought belonged only to him and his fear. He just stared, eyes glassy, mouth still open from whatever cry had been caught mid-echo. The watcher reached into their coat, a coat that had not been there moments ago, and pulled out a piece of chalk. It was smooth and white, glowing faintly like the flower's memory. They placed it between them. The boy looked at it. The watcher gestured gently to the dream walls. And the boy slowly, uncertainly picked up the chalk. He approached the wall-closet forest and drew a door. Not a perfect one. It wobbled and the lines bent. But it formed. A rectangle. A knob. A hinge. A way out. The watcher stood beside him as he reached forward and touched it. It didn't open. Not yet. Because this door didn't lead away from the dream. It led back to the real moment. The one buried under the fear, under the thunder, under the years of hiding beneath bedsheets and blinking too fast to let tears fall. The boy closed his eyes, took a breath, and turned the knob. The room began to peel away. Not fall apart, just unfold like a paper lantern being opened after years of dust. The walls stopped shifting. The forest became a memory. The closet became a story told later in light, not shame. And the boy was gone. Awake. Safe. The watcher stepped back. The chalk had vanished. But on the wall, where the dream once wavered and whimpered, a flower now bloomed. Small. White. Shaped like a key. And somewhere in a real-world bedroom under a heavy blanket, the boy sat upright and whispered, "I remember now." Then he smiled. Not because the fear was gone, but because he wasn't alone with it anymore. Back in the field beyond time, the silver tree rustled once, and from the soil beneath it, another flower began to grow. The hallway had changed, the dreams had changed, and the watcher, walking now toward the next door, could feel them all beginning to awaken. One by one by one, the watcher emerged from the fading dream, not through a crack or a step, but by simply letting go of the moment once it no longer needed holding. The world between dreams, the space that shimmered like breath on glass, welcomed them back without fanfare. No applause, no heralding voice, only the soft wind through branches that had never truly belonged to trees, and a sky that shifted slowly from indigo to gold without ever deciding which one it preferred. Behind them, the flower left in the boy's dream bloomed fully now, anchored into the soil of memory. And even though the boy wouldn't remember the watcher's face, or the exact shape of the door he drew, he would remember the choice. The moment the fear stopped being a wall and became a window. The key wasn't in his hand anymore, but in his spine, his chest, his story. The watcher walked through the field again. And now, there were hundreds of flowers. Some shaped like feathers. Some shaped like tiny doors. Some pulsed with slow light like hearts. Each one marking where a door had been drawn, and someone had chosen to open it. The tree at the center of the field, once alone, was no longer solitary. New trees had begun to rise around it. They were younger, less certain in shape, but they glowed faintly in the twilight, each one born from a dream where something had been faced, not fled, where something had healed. The watcher looked up, and there, just above the horizon, another door appeared. It hovered in the air, rimmed in the soft gold of dawning memory. This one was old. Its wood was dark and smooth, like it had been knocked on many times by voices no longer living. And from within it came a sound the watcher knew well. Song. Bow broken. Someone was humming a lullaby but couldn't finish it. Someone trapped between dreams and death. Someone who had waited too long to speak what needed to be said. The watcher moved toward it, calm and steady, because this one would not be as simple as chalk and flowers. Some doors were drawn with hope, others with regret, and the watcher was trained for both. As they neared, the door opened, not outward, not inward, but inwardly, like a breath being held. And they stepped through. It was a hospital room, dim, monitors ticking, curtains drawn. A woman sat in a chair, her body still, but her dreams still active, caught somewhere just past the veil. She was remembering a child she hadn't seen in years, remembering words she never said, regrets she had folded up and kept in the corners of her chest. The room around her was made of those regrets. The bed was her silence. The windows were made of memories that turned their backs. And on the walls, dozens of doors, all closed, all locked. The watcher did not panic. They sat beside her and began to hum, not the lullaby but the next note. The one she couldn't find. The one that finished the song. The sound wound through the room like wind through reeds. It curled around the locked doors, brushed the memory windows. It stirred something in the woman's dreaming eyes. And one door, just one, unlatched. It creaked open with the quiet sorrow of someone finally forgiving themselves. Inside was a nursery, a crib, a photograph, a letter never mailed, a child's drawing kept in a drawer but never framed. The woman walked in. She wept. She forgave. And when she turned to the watcher, she said simply, "Thank you for knocking." The door closed softly behind her. The hospital monitor steadied. Her fingers moved just slightly, and the watcher returned once more. To the field, to the sky of shifting color, to the hum that now followed them not as warning, but as welcome. The trees whispered, the flowers bloomed, and somewhere on the farthest edge of a map no one had drawn yet, a new child was beginning to dream of doorways. The sky over the field rippled again, softly, slowly, like silk unraveling from the edge. The watcher stood beneath its shifting colors, eyes lifted, listening. Not with ears, but with that deeper sense one only gains after walking through enough silence. The hum had changed again. It wasn't calling. It was inviting. The watcher turned toward the east edge of the field, where no path had ever been carved. But now the grass lay pressed in a long arc, not from feet but from possibility. Something new was waking. Not sorrow, not pain, but a different kind of door. One built not from fear or forgetting, but from wonder. They walked. Each step left no imprint, yet the land remembered. Behind the watcher, the trees whispered stories they'd never been told before. The flowers turned slowly to follow. The silver-barked tree did not move, but a single leaf drifted down, spiraling through the air like a farewell that wasn't quite a goodbye. Ahead the field gave way to mist, thick and luminous, like starlight spilled across the ground. And within it laughter, a child's, high and bright and echoing through the fog in circles that seemed to fold time in on itself. The watcher stepped in. The mist wrapped around them, cool but not cold, and the world inside shimmered with layers. Dreams nested within dreams. A carousel turned slowly in the distance, though no hands touched it. Books flapped like birds. A house floated upside down in the sky. This wasn't a nightmare. It was a wild dream, untamed. And in the center of it all stood a child, eyes closed, arms stretched out, spinning slowly with joy. The air around them rippled like heat, bending shapes, turning shadows into birds, turning birds into bells. The watcher understood. Some dreams did not need to be healed. They only needed to be kept safe. This child hadn't been lost. They had simply gone too far. Too far into a place most forget by morning. Too far into wonder. And now the dream was closing in, turning sweet into strange, joy into weight. The watcher didn't approach. Not yet. Instead, they knelt in the mist and drew a small circle into the ground with their finger. No chalk needed here. The circle glowed faintly, then pulsed outward like a heartbeat. Shapes stilled. The floating house drifted gently down. The carousel slowed to a stop. The birds folded back into paper. The fog softened, and the child stopped spinning. They opened their eyes. Big, bright, unafraid. They saw the watcher and smiled. "You found me," they said. The watcher tilted their head. "Were you hiding?" The child shrugged. "No, I was just going." The watcher smiled softly. "It's time to rest now." The child walked over and placed a hand on the watcher's. "Will I remember?" The watcher paused. "Not all of it," they said. "But you'll remember that someone waited for you." The child nodded. "That's enough." Together they walked back through the mist, back into the field where a new flower now bloomed. This one different. Not shaped like a key or a door or a feather. This one looked like a spiral, winding inward and outward at once, like a reminder that not all dreams are meant to end. Summer meant to begin. And far away, in a quiet bedroom filled with stuffed animals and nightlights, a child stirred in sleep and murmured, "I wasn't alone." And in the corner of the room, invisible to all but those who remembered, a doorway shimmered once, then disappeared. The watcher stood again beneath the sky. The hum was quiet now. Not gone. Just resting. Because the dream was still unfolding. And they would be ready. For the next door. And so at last the watcher stood still. In the center of the ever-shifting field beneath the silver-barked tree, beneath a sky that remembered more than it revealed, they looked out across what had been left behind. Flowers blooming where fear had faded, trees rising from moments where silence had been broken, and echoes of laughter and tears carried gently on the wind. They had walked through forgotten dreams, healed wounds hidden in the folds of memory, carried the burden of doors no one else knew how to open. And now they were tired, not broken, not empty, just full. Full of stories, full of names, full of quiet goodbyes that had never been spoken aloud. The field did not ask for more. It understood. Even the hum had softened to a hush, like a lullaby finishing its final note. The doors had stopped appearing, not because there were no more to be opened, but because others were walking now. The children who had been guided, the ones who had drawn their own doors, had started to listen too. They were becoming watchers in their own quiet ways, whispering light into dark corners, planting courage where it had once been lost. The watcher sat beneath the silver tree one last time. They reached into their coat and removed the seed, the one the flower had left in their chest so long ago. It still glowed, but now it pulsed with a rhythm not meant for them anymore. They placed it gently into the earth beside the others, and as it touched the soil, the tree above them bloomed in full, petals unfurling with a sigh, releasing threads of gold into the sky, drifting upward like stardust toward constellations that had never yet been named. Above, a new star blinked into being. Just one, but enough. The watcher closed their eyes, and as the wind rose through the grass and through the flowers and through the dreams of 1,000 dreamers still tucked in sleep, a single truth moved quietly across the field. There will always be doors. There will always be someone to walk through them. And none of us ever walk alone. The watcher smiled, softly like dawn. And then, they faded into the wind. Not gone, just passed on. And somewhere, far away in the first quiet hour before morning, a child blinked at the edge of sleep, heard the faintest hum in the dark, and whispered to no one at all, "I'm ready." And a door began to open. Forever. Quietly. Bravely.